Ever find yourself wide awake at some ungodly hour, say 2:47 a.m., running disaster scenarios on repeat in your head? The transmission fails, your computer finally gives up, the company announces layoffs, your dog swallows something expensive. This loop of catastrophic thinking isn't insomnia. It's your brain trying to solve a math problem it can't answer yet. Here's what's wild. There is an actual number that stops most of these midnight spiral sessions cold. Not some vague financial security concept, but a specific target. And no, it's not what Instagram influencers flash around. It's not 6 figures in crypto or a paid-off mortgage. It's $10,000. People assume these financial targets are just made-up benchmarks, arbitrary goalposts designed by people who've already won the game. But dig into the research, and you'll find something surprising. Certain dollar amounts trigger measurable psychological shifts that fundamentally alter your daily experience. The real kicker? The first threshold that creates genuine transformation isn't nearly as high as you'd think. I'm Tim, and I've developed what some might call an unhealthy obsession with understanding why identical financial situations can feel completely different depending on what's sitting in your savings account. I'm fascinated by the gap between people who weather money problems like minor turbulence versus those who experience every financial hiccup as a full-blown emergency. What actually happens inside your head when you cross different savings thresholds? How does your behavior shift when you go from 0 to 5,000 or from 5 to 15? These aren't abstract questions. They have concrete answers that change how you'll approach everything from career moves to daily purchases. If this sounds like territory worth exploring, go ahead and subscribe. And if this breakdown ends up being useful, a like helps other people find their way here too. So let's get into why $10,000 specifically matters. But first, you need to understand what existence looks like on the other side of that line, when you're operating with nothing in reserve. Think about standing in the checkout line doing mental arithmetic, not because you're bored, but because you're genuinely unsure if you can swing the better cereal. The one that doesn't taste like sweetened packing material costs $3 more. $3! And you're running calculations about whether that difference breaks something else in your budget. Or picture this, your group chat lights up for dinner plans. Everyone's excited about this new place downtown. You're doing instant math on what an entree plus tax plus tip equals, realizing it's about $25 and knowing that $25 represents a legitimate budget crisis. So you craft some plausible excuse. You're tired, you've got an early morning, you're trying to eat healthier, anything but the truth. This is standard operating procedure for millions of people locked in the paycheck cycle. Every purchase becomes a negotiation with yourself. Every unexpected cost feels like it could trigger a collapse. You're in permanent defensive mode, constantly reacting to financial threats rather than making intentional choices about where you want your life to go. The mental toll is exhausting. It's like playing a video game where you can only dodge attacks but never actually make progress toward any goal. Here's where things get genuinely interesting. Something specific happens psychologically when you hit that first 5-figure milestone, and it has absolutely nothing to do with suddenly being able to afford luxury purchases. In fact, most people who cross this threshold don't change their spending patterns much at all. The shift is far more subtle and far more powerful. What fundamentally transforms is how you perceive risk itself. When your savings account shows 0, everything feels like a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. Switching jobs? Terrifying. Relocating to a new city? Unthinkable. Even booking a simple vacation triggers anxiety because you're acutely aware that any miscalculation could financially wreck you. But once you've got $10,000 working as a foundation, these exact same decisions suddenly feel navigable. You're not about to impulsively quit your job to pursue professional skateboarding, but you might actually feel confident enough to request that promotion you've been contemplating for 6 months. You might invest in a professional certification that could boost your market value. The safety net doesn't turn you into a reckless risk taker. Instead, it grants you permission to think beyond mere survival mode. You can start planning moves instead of just defending your current position. There's something remarkable that happens in your nervous system. them when you see a five-figure balance appear in your account for the first time. This isn't motivational fluff. Neuroscience backs this up. Financial security measurably lowers your cortisol production, the hormone your body pumps out in response to stress. Translation: crossing the $10,000 mark doesn't just improve your finances, it physically alters how your body and brain handle everyday pressures. Consider what happens when your car starts making that ominous noise. If you're living without a buffer, that sound might as well be a countdown clock to financial ruin. Instant panic. Your mind races through nightmare scenarios: credit card debt, borrowing from relatives, choosing between the repair and groceries. The stress response is immediate and overwhelming, but with $10,000 backing you up, that same concerning noise becomes annoying. Still frustrating, sure, but you're not spiraling into panic mode. You're irritated at the inconvenience, not terrified of the consequences. This distinction between panic and annoyance might sound trivial, but its effects ripple through everything. When financial stress isn't constantly hijacking your nervous system, you make smarter decisions across the board. Your sleep quality improves. Your work performance sharpens. You have more patience with the people around you. Money stress doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains your capacity to function effectively in every domain of life. Remove that drain, and suddenly you have mental resources available for actually improving your situation instead of just surviving it. Here's what most people completely miss about the $10,000 milestone. The overwhelming majority of its value has nothing to do with actually spending the money. The power comes from knowing it exists. Financial experts call this the emergency fund effect, and it's probably one of the most underappreciated principles in all of personal finance. An emergency fund isn't really about the emergencies themselves. It's about the psychological shift that happens when you know you're covered if emergencies strike. Here's the counterintuitive part. Most people who successfully build $10,000 in savings rarely touch it for actual emergencies. Instead, they deploy it toward opportunities. They fund their education, they launch small businesses, they relocate to places with better prospects, or they simply redirect mental bandwidth toward income growth because their brain isn't consumed by survival-level financial anxiety anymore. When you're no longer mentally paralyzed by what-if scenarios, you can start focusing on what's possible scenarios instead. That shift in focus is where the real magic happens. There's also this intangible confidence factor that's almost impossible to measure, but impossible to ignore once you experience it. When you know money's sitting in your account, you literally carry yourself differently. Your body language changes. Your negotiation style shifts. You become genuinely willing to walk away from bad deals because desperation isn't driving your decisions anymore. This confidence creates a feedback loop that leads to tangibly better outcomes: stronger job offers, healthier relationships, improved life circumstances across the board. Think about salary negotiations. The person with zero savings goes into that conversation from a position of need. They're thinking, I really hope they say yes because I can't afford to keep looking. That desperation is subtle, but hiring managers can sense it. The person with $10,000 saved walks into that same conversation thinking, let's see if this opportunity makes sense for me. That's not arrogance. That's legitimate optionality, and that shift in energy often translates directly into better compensation packages. The money in your account doesn't just protect you from disasters, it fundamentally changes your leverage in every negotiation you'll ever have. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, $10,000 sounds completely impossible, especially if I'm struggling to save even $100 monthly, here's what you need to understand about human psychology. The challenge isn't actually the saving, it's becoming the kind of person who saves. Most people treat saving like a crash diet. They slash expenses aggressively for a couple months, save hard, then burn out completely and revert to old patterns. It's unsustainable by design. The people who successfully reach $10,000 don't approach it as a temporary sacrifice. They approach it as an identity transformation. They're not just trying to accumulate money, they're becoming a different version of themselves. This identity shift matters because it influences every financial choice you make going forward. When you genuinely see yourself as someone who saves, you start noticing expense reduction opportunities that were invisible before. You get creative about generating additional income. Your thinking extends beyond immediate gratification into long-term strategy. And here's the beautiful part.
The process becomes progressively easier. Saving your first $1,000 is brutal. It demands significant lifestyle adjustments and constant willpower, but your second thousand noticeably smoother because the habits and mindset are already developing. By the time you're working toward your fifth or sixth thousand, the process feels almost automatic. You're not white-knuckling through savings anymore. You're just being who you've become. There's also a straightforward mathematical reality that makes $10,000 particularly powerful as a threshold. This amount covers the vast majority of unexpected expenses that typically derail people financially. Car repairs, medical bills, temporary job loss, family emergencies, most of these situations resolve for under $10,000, which means once you hit this milestone, you've essentially immunized yourself against most of the financial catastrophes that trap people in the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. But the transformation goes deeper than just crisis management. The most significant shift happens in how you conceptualize money itself. Before you have savings, money feels scarce and fleeting. It's something that evaporates from your paycheck each month. Every dollar you spend feels permanently gone, vanished into the void. But when you've got $10,000 working as your financial foundation, you start understanding that money can be a tool for creating more opportunities. Money stops being purely consumable and starts being multipliable. This is the exact moment people begin getting genuinely curious about concepts like investing, side income streams, and passive revenue. Not because they suddenly became financial wizards, but because they finally have the mental space to think beyond covering basic survival needs. When rent isn't a constant worry, you can start wondering about retirement accounts. When groceries aren't a source of stress, you can start researching market investments. The bandwidth opens up. Here's something that might completely reframe how you think about wealth building. The person with $10,000 saved is actually closer to genuine financial independence than someone with zero savings, even if that second person earns double the income. Why? Because the saver has mastered the most critical skill in wealth building. And it's not earning money, it's retaining money. You probably know people pulling in six-figure salaries who are somehow perpetually broke. They're driving vehicles that cost more than some people's houses. They're living in apartments with rent that would make your eyes water. They're eating at restaurants where a single salad costs $20, but their savings account? Empty. Meanwhile, you might know someone earning $40,000 annually who's managed to accumulate substantial reserves through intentional spending choices. The difference isn't income level, it's mindset. And the journey to $10,000 is essentially a masterclass in developing the right financial psychology. You learn to distinguish genuine needs from temporary wants. You develop skills for reducing expenses without feeling deprived. Most critically, you cultivate patience for delayed gratification, which is arguably the single most valuable financial skill anyone can develop. That skill alone is worth more than most people's college degrees. Let's get concrete about what $10,000 can actually handle in real-world terms. First, it covers virtually any car repair short of replacing the entire engine. Most automotive emergencies fall somewhere between $500 and $3,000. With $10,000 in reserve, car problems transform into minor frustrations. Medical emergencies become manageable too. Even with subpar insurance, most urgent care visits, ER trips, or minor procedures land within this range. You're not covering major surgery with $10,000, but you can handle the majority of health issues that emerge unexpectedly. Then there's job loss, probably the scariest financial scenario for most people. $10,000 provides roughly 3 to 6 months of runway to find new employment depending on your burn rate. That's enough time to be selective about your next move instead of desperately grabbing the first offer that appears. But here's where things get really interesting. $10,000 doesn't just protect you from catastrophes. It actively creates opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. Maybe you discover a certification program that could increase your annual salary by $10,000, but it requires $2,000 up front. Without savings, impossible. With your financial foundation, it's an obvious investment. Or perhaps a friend mentions they're launching a venture and seeking a small investor. Without savings, you can only offer encouragement. But with $10,000, you actually have the option to participate in something that could potentially reshape your financial trajectory. I'm not suggesting you should pour your entire emergency fund into your buddy's NFT project, but having options feels radically different from having zero options. The psychological impact extends well beyond financial decisions alone. When you've got money saved, you sleep better. This isn't metaphorical, it's literal. Research shows that people with emergency funds report significantly higher sleep quality compared to those without any reserves. Financial stress ranks among the leading causes of insomnia, and eliminating that stress delivers immediate health dividends. Your relationships improve as well. Money tension gets cited as one of the primary drivers of divorce and family conflict. When you're not perpetually anxious about bills, you have more emotional capacity to invest in the people that matter. You're less irritable, less on edge, and more genuinely present during interactions. There's also the confidence boost that comes from having reserves in place. You walk into job interviews with a completely different energy when you don't desperately need the position. You're far more likely to negotiate salary and benefits because you're not operating from fear. This confidence frequently translates into better job offers and higher compensation, creating a positive feedback loop that accelerates your financial progress even further. The money doesn't just sit there passively, it actively works to improve multiple dimensions of your life simultaneously. Let's address the obvious concern here. If you're currently living paycheck to paycheck, $10,000 probably sounds like an astronomical figure. The good news? You don't need to accumulate it all at once. In fact, trying to save too aggressively usually backfires because it's fundamentally unsustainable. The most successful savers I've observed started with absurdly small amounts, maybe $50 monthly, sometimes even $25. The amount itself isn't what matters initially. It's the consistency of the behavior. Once you establish the habit of saving something every single month, you can gradually increase the contribution as your income grows or as you identify ways to trim expenses. Here's a reality check that might provide some motivation. The average American drops over $3,000 annually on coffee runs, restaurant meals, and convenience purchases. That's not even accounting for major expenses like car payments or streaming subscriptions. If you could redirect just 1/3 of that spending toward savings, you'd reach $10,000 in under 3 years. I'm not suggesting you should never enjoy coffee or eat out. I'm simply pointing out that most people have more flexibility in their budgets than they initially realize. The gap between someone who builds savings and someone who doesn't typically comes down to awareness and intentionality, not income level. The compound effects of having $10,000 extends far beyond the immediate security it provides. It fundamentally reshapes how you think about risk, how you evaluate opportunities, and how you construct plans for the future. Most importantly, it proves to yourself that you're actually capable of achieving financial goals, which creates momentum for even bigger accomplishments ahead. Once you've got your first $10,000 saved, you start thinking differently about your next $10,000, and then the one after that. Before long, you're on a genuine path to financial independence, not because you got lucky or inherited wealth, but because you developed the habits and mindset that make wealth building inevitable. The transformation that occurs when you save your first $10,000 isn't really about the money itself. It's about becoming the type of person who has money saved. And that identity shift creates ripple effects that extend into every corner of your existence in ways you probably can't anticipate until you experience them firsthand. Let's talk about something called decision fatigue. It sounds like corporate jargon, but it's a legitimate psychological phenomenon with real consequences. Every single day, you're making thousands of micro financial decisions. Generic pasta or name brand, pack lunch or buy something, regular gas or premium. Each of these tiny choices burns mental energy. By day's end, you're exhausted from constantly calculating whether you can afford basic things. But here's what shifts when you've got $10,000 in reserve. Suddenly, about 90% of these daily financial decisions become irrelevant. You're not choosing generic pasta because you're worried about your account balance. You're choosing based on what you actually want to eat. This might sound insignificant, but imagine the mental energy you'd reclaim if you stopped making survival-based calculations 50 times daily. I know someone who told me the first time they entered a grocery store after crossing the $10,000 threshold, they nearly got emotional. Not because they went wild buying caviar and champagne, but because they realized they could focus on what they actually wanted to eat rather than what they could afford to eat. That's a type of freedom most people don't even recognize they're missing until they experience it firsthand. Now let's be clear about something financial advisors don't always emphasize. Having $10,000 saved doesn't make you wealthy. It doesn't mean you can quit your job and become a professional surfing instructor.
You're still going to think twice before dropping $1,000 on some gadget you don't actually need. But what it does provide is breathing room. And breathing room is the foundation every smart financial decision is built on. When you're not gasping for financial air, you can actually think strategically about your money instead of just reacting to whatever crisis materializes next. Maybe you notice your car insurance renewal approaching, and you actually have time to shop around for better rates instead of just accepting whatever they send. Maybe you realize your phone plan is absurdly expensive, and you can switch to something cheaper without stressing about activation fees. These optimizations might only save you $50 or $100 monthly, but when you're not constantly stressed about money, you're far more likely to notice these opportunities in the first place. And those small optimizations compound over time into serious savings that make your next financial milestone even more achievable. Here's something fascinating about human psychology that most people overlook. When you have zero savings, every single dollar feels precious, because losing it means you're one step closer to financial disaster. But when you've got $10,000 saved, individual dollars start feeling less precious, which paradoxically makes you more willing to spend money on things that could increase your earning potential. This seems backward, but it's incredibly important. The person with no savings might skip a $50 networking event because $50 feels substantial when you're living paycheck to paycheck. But the person with $10,000 saved might attend that same event and end up connecting with someone who offers them a position paying $5,000 more annually. The safety net doesn't make you careless with money. It makes you more willing to invest in genuine opportunities. I've watched this pattern play out repeatedly. People who build their first substantial savings often experience sudden acceleration in career growth, not because having money directly leads to promotions, but because financial security provides the confidence to take calculated risks that broke people simply cannot afford to take. Let's discuss something nobody mentions in personal finance articles, but everyone experiences in real life: the social dynamics of money. When you're constantly stressed about your financial situation, it affects how you interact with other people in subtle but significant ways. You might avoid social situations entirely because you can't afford to participate. You might feel embarrassed about your financial struggles and become increasingly withdrawn. You might even develop resentment toward friends who appear more financially stable. But when you have that $10,000 foundation, these social anxieties start dissolving. You're not avoiding dinner invitations because you're terrified of the cost. You're not making excuses to skip activities. You can actually show up as yourself instead of as someone constantly managing financial shame. This shift doesn't just improve your social life, it often opens doors professionally too. Networking becomes natural rather than stressful. You can attend industry events without panic. You can invest in relationships without constantly calculating the cost. The confidence that comes from financial stability radiates outward in ways that create opportunities you couldn't have predicted. So, there you have it. $10,000 isn't just a number sitting in your bank account. It's a complete psychological transformation that touches every dimension of your existence. From sleeping through the night without financial anxiety to walking into job interviews with genuine confidence instead of desperation, this milestone creates a cascade of effects that most people never anticipate. If you're currently looking at a bank balance that resembles a 2-digit area code, don't spiral. Start small, stay consistent, and remember this: the person you become while building your first $10,000 is infinitely more valuable than the money itself. The habits you develop, the mindset you cultivate, the identity you construct, that's what actually changes your life. The money is just the evidence that you've made the transformation. And once you prove to yourself that you can do it once, the path to doing it again becomes clear. That's when real financial independence stops being some distant fantasy and starts becoming your inevitable future.